The rain came down in sheets, hammering the pavement of that grimy New York alley like it wanted to drown us both. I stood there, shivering, staring at Caleb, my heart clawing its way up my throat. His eyes, those hazel eyes I'd fallen into 1,000 times, were wild-haunted, like he was already half gone. "Caleb, don't do this," I whispered, my voice breaking under the weight of the moment. My hands gripped his leather jacket, knuckles white, as if I could anchor him to me, to us. But his face, usually so steady, so sure, was fracturing, and the blood on his sleeve wasn't helping. "I have to, Ethan," he said, his voice low, trembling. "I'm sorry." That was the last thing he said before he slipped out of my grasp, disappearing into the shadows of the city. I didn't know then that I'd spend the next 3 years chasing ghosts, piecing together the wreckage of that night. All I had was a crumpled note in my pocket, stained with his blood, scrawled with 3 words, "I had to." What do you do when the person you love most vanishes, leaving you with nothing but questions? How do you rebuild when the foundation of your world crumbles in a single moment? For me, it started in that alley. But the real story began months earlier, in the quiet moments when Caleb and I thought we could conquer anything. We met at a dive bar in Brooklyn, the kind with sticky floors and neon signs that buzzed like dying flies. I was 24, fresh out of art school, scraping by on freelance gigs and too many dreams. Caleb was 26, a bartender with a crooked smile and a way of looking at you that made you feel like the only person in the room. That night, he slid a beer across the counter and said, "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders. Man, want to tell me about it?" What makes someone open up to a stranger? Was it his voice, warm like whiskey, or the way his eyes held mine without judgment? I don't know, but I talked. About my art, my fears, the way I'd always felt like I was hiding a piece of myself. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, I'd learned to keep my head down, to love quietly, to avoid the wrong kind of attention. But with Caleb, I didn't want to hide. By the end of the night, we were laughing, sharing stories under the dim glow of the bar's lights. He told me about his own past, how he'd left a strict family in Texas, how he'd come to New York to find himself. "I'm still figuring it out," he said, his smile softening. "But I think I like who I am when I'm with you." What does it mean to find someone who sees you, really sees you? For us, it was everything. Over the next few months, we built something fragile but beautiful. Stolen kisses in Central Park, late-night talks in my tiny apartment, painting together on my fire escape as the city hummed below. Caleb wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my muse, my anchor, the one who made me believe I could be more than a scared kid from Ohio. But there were cracks, even then. Caleb had secret phone calls he'd step outside to take, nights when he'd come home tense, his jaw tight. "It's nothing," he'd say when I pressed, but his eyes told a different story. What do you do when the person you love is holding something back? Do you push, or do you trust? I chose trust, because I couldn't imagine a world where Caleb wasn't mine. That trust led me to that rainy alley, to the moment that broke everything. The night started innocently enough, a gallery opening for my first big show. I'd spent weeks on those paintings, pouring my soul into canvases that screamed love, identity, and defiance. Caleb was supposed to be there, cheering me on. But he didn't show. Hours later, I found him in that alley, blood on his sleeve, his face pale. "Ethan, I'm in trouble," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I didn't want you to get caught up in this." Caught up in what? I demanded, fear clawing at me. But he wouldn't answer. He just pressed that note into my hand, kissed me hard, and then he was gone. What would you do if the person you loved disappeared without explanation? Would you chase them, or let them go? I couldn't let go. Not when I could still feel his kiss, still see the fear in his eyes. That night, I made a vow. I'd find Caleb, no matter what it took. I didn't know then that the search would lead me into a world of secrets darker than I could have imagined. I didn't know that Caleb's past wasn't just a story of a kid escaping a small town. It was a web of lies, debts, and danger. But standing in that alley, clutching his note, I knew one thing. I wasn't giving up on him. Not yet. The days after Caleb vanished felt like wading through fog thick. Disorienting. Suffocating. I'd wake up reaching for him, only to find the cold side of the bed, his scent fading from the pillows. How do you keep going when the person who made life make sense is gone? I started with what I had, the note. I had to. 3 words, smeared with blood, written in his hurried scrawl. I turned it over in my hands 1,000 times, searching for meaning. Was he hurt? Running? Hiding? The blood wasn't enough to suggest a wound, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. I called his phone straight to voicemail. I texted, emailed, even checked his social media, but it was like he'd been erased. What do you do when someone disappears without a trace? I went to the bar where we met, hoping for answers. The bartender, a gruff guy named Mike, frowned when I mentioned Caleb. He quit a week ago, Mike said, wiping down the counter. Didn't say why. Just left. A week ago. That was before the gallery opening. Before the alley. Why hadn't he told me? The betrayal stung. Sharp and unexpected. I thought we shared everything. But Caleb had been pulling away, and I'd been too in love to notice. I started digging deeper, retracing our steps. Our favorite coffee shop. The park where we'd watch the sunset. The bookstore where he'd tease me about my love for poetry. Everywhere I went, I asked questions, showed his picture, described his laugh. Most people shook their heads, but one barista at the coffee shop hesitated. He was here a few days ago, she said. With some guy? Looked intense. Intense how? She couldn't say, but her words lit a spark of hope and dread. Who was this guy? What was Caleb hiding? I went back to my apartment, tore through his things, clothes, books, a half-finished sketch he'd drawn of me. Nothing gave me answers, but I found a receipt tucked in his jacket pocket, a diner in the Bronx, dated the day before he vanished. The diner was a greasy spoon, all cracked vinyl booths and flickering fluorescent lights. I sat at the counter, clutching a coffee I didn't drink, and showed the waitress Caleb's picture. You seen him? I asked. She squinted, then nodded. Yeah, he was here. With a guy in a suit. Didn't look like they were buddies. A guy in a suit. My mind raced. Was this the same person the barista mentioned? What kind of trouble was Caleb in? I pressed her for details, but she shrugged. They argued, paid, left. That's all I got. What would you do with fragments of a puzzle, but no picture to guide you? I kept going, driven by the need to understand. I started asking around in shadier corners of the city clubs, backrooms, places Caleb never took me. Whispers led me to a name, Victor. No last name, just Victor, a guy who fixed problems for people who could pay. The idea of Caleb mixed up with someone like that made my skin crawl. Caleb, with his gentle hands and quiet laugh, involved with a fixer. It didn't add up. But the more I asked, the more I heard Victor's name, always tied to trouble debts, deals, people who disappeared. One night, I tracked down a lead to a warehouse in Red Hook. It was a stupid move, going alone, but desperation doesn't leave room for caution. The place was dark, reeking of oil and rust, with voices echoing from deep inside. I crept closer, heart pounding, and caught a glimpse of a man in a suit, tall, sharp-eyed, dangerous. Was this Victor? Before I could get closer, someone grabbed me from behind, a hand clamping over my mouth. "You don't belong here," a voice hissed. I struggled, but they were stronger. They dragged me outside, shoved me against a wall, and told me to stop asking questions. "Caleb's gone," the man said, his face hidden in shadow. "Let it go, or you'll end up like him." I stumbled home, bruised and shaking, but the warning only fueled me. What kind of love lets go when the stakes are life and death? I didn't know if Caleb was alive, but I knew I couldn't stop. Not yet. The warehouse incident should have scared me off, but it only made me hungrier for answers. How do you walk away when every clue points to danger? I couldn't shake the image of Caleb's face that night in the alley. The way his eyes begged me to understand something he couldn't say. I started piecing together what I knew. Caleb had been arguing with some Ania guy in a suite at the diner. He'd quit his job without telling me. And now, someone was warning me to back off. The threads were thin, but they were there, leading me to Victor. I needed to know who he was and what he had on Caleb. I turned to the internet, scouring forums, social media, anything that might mention Victor. Most of what I found was noise rumors, dead ends. But one post on a sketchy message board caught my eye. "Victor runs things in the Bronx. Debts, favors, blood. Don't cross him." No details, no last name, but it was enough to keep me digging. What do you do when the truth feels just out of reach? I went back to the diner, this time at night, hoping to catch someone who knew more. The same waitress was there, looking tired but kind. I slid her a 20 and asked about the guy in the suit. "He comes in sometimes," she said, glancing around. "Always pays cash. Never alone." She didn't know his name, but she mentioned a club he frequented, a place called the Red Door, tucked away in a part of the city I'd never been to. It was a lead, but it felt like stepping into a lion's den. What would you risk for the truth? For me, it was everything. The Red Door was a hole-in-the-wall club, all pulsing lights and bass that rattled your bones. I felt out of place, my paint-stained jeans and nervous energy screaming outsider. I scanned the crowd, looking for anyone who matched the description of the man in the suit. That's when I saw a woman with sharp eyes and a presence that commanded the room. She wasn't Victor, but something told me she knew him. I approached her, heart in my throat. "I'm looking for someone named Victor," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Her smile was cold, like she could see right through me. "You're Ethan, aren't you?" she said. My blood ran cold. How did she know my name? "Caleb mentioned you," she continued, sipping her drink. "He said you were stubborn." He wasn't wrong. What does it mean when a stranger knows more about your life than you do? I pressed her for answers, but she was cagey, dropping hints without giving anything concrete. "Caleb owed people," she said finally. "Big people. He thought he could outrun it, but you can't outrun Victor." "Owed what?" "Money. Favors. Something worse." She wouldn't say, but she gave me a name, Maria. "Find Maria," she said. "She knows more than I do." Finding Maria wasn't easy. It took days of asking around, following leads to dead ends, until I tracked her to a community center in Harlem. She was older, maybe 50, with kind eyes but a guarded demeanor. When I mentioned Caleb, her face softened. "He was a good kid," she said, "but he got mixed up with the wrong crowd." Maria told me Caleb had been working for Victor not as a bartender, but as a courier, moving things he shouldn't have. Drugs, maybe, or worse. He wanted out, she said. Tried to make a deal to walk away. That's when things went bad. What do you do when you learn the person you love was living a double life? I felt betrayed. But more than that, I felt guilty. Why hadn't I seen it? Why hadn't I pushed harder when I saw the signs? Maria didn't have answers, but she gave me a warning. Victor doesn't let people walk away. If you keep looking, you're putting yourself in his crosshairs. I didn't care. Caleb was out there, somewhere, and I wasn't giving up. But as I left the community center, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The weight of Maria's words clung to me like damp clothes. Caleb, a courier for someone like Victor. It didn't fit the man I knew, the one who'd trace patterns on my skin and talk about dreams of leaving the city behind. How do you reconcile the person you love with the secrets they kept? I couldn't stop, though. Not when I was this close. Maria had given me another Lita storage unit in Queens that Caleb had mentioned to her. He kept things there, she'd said. Things he didn't want anyone to find. The storage facility was a maze of rusted doors and flickering lights. I bribed the night guard with the last of my cash to let me in. Unit 47 was Caleb's, and my hands shook as I broke the lock with a crowbar I'd bought from a hardware store. Inside, I found boxes of papers, photos, and a laptop I didn't know he owned. What do you hope to find when you're digging into someone's secrets? For me, it was answers. The laptop was password protected, but the papers were a goldmine. Receipts, coded notes, and a photo of Caleb with a man I didn't recognize at all. Sharp-eyed, in a suit. Victor. One note stood out, written in Caleb's handwriting. Meet V at Pier 19. Midnight. Last job. It was dated the day he disappeared. My heart sank. Had he gone to that meeting? Was that where the blood came from? I took everything I could carry and went back to my apartment, spreading the papers across my floor like a detective in a movie. The coded notes were gibberish to me, but the laptop was my next target. I wasn't a hacker, but I knew someone who might help Jess, a friend from art school who'd always been good with computers. Jess came over, her eyes widening at the mess of papers. Ethan, what the hell are you into? She asked, but she agreed to help. It took hours, but she cracked the laptop's password. Inside, we found emails encrypted, but not well enough. They were between Caleb and someone called V. The messages were short, cryptic, drop at pier. Payment due. No mistakes. What does it feel like to see proof that the person you love was in over their head? It felt like drowning. But one email stopped me cold. I'm out after this. Ethan deserves better. My name, in Caleb's words, tied to his decision to leave whatever this was. Jess wanted me to go to the police, but I couldn't. Not yet. The police wouldn't care about a missing bartender with a shady past. And if Victor was as dangerous as everyone said, I couldn't risk exposing Caleb or myself until I knew more. I went to Pier 19 the next night, hoping for a clue. It was a desolate stretch of waterfront, all rusted cranes and abandoned warehouses. The air smelled of salt and decay, and every shadow felt alive. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I found it, a small duffel bag hidden behind a crate, stuffed with cash and a burner phone. The phone had one number saved. I called it, my heart pounding. A man answered, his voice smooth and cold. You shouldn't have this number, he said. Who are you? Ethan, I said, my voice steady despite the fear. Where's Caleb? There was a pause, then a low chuckle. You're the boyfriend. Caleb warned me you'd be trouble. What do you say to the man who might hold the key to everything? I demanded answers, but he hung up. Seconds later, the phone buzzed with a text. Stop looking, or you're next. I stood there, the wind whipping off the water, clutching a bag of money that wasn't mine. Caleb was alive or had been. But the deeper I went, the more I realized I didn't know him at all. The duffel bag sat in my apartment like a ticking bomb. Thousands of dollars, a burner phone, and a text that felt like a death threat. What had Caleb been part of? How do you love someone when every new truth feels like a betrayal? I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the voice on the phone, smooth and menacing. Victor. It had to be. He knew my name, knew about me and Caleb. That meant Caleb had talked about me, maybe even tried to protect me. But from what? I went back to the laptop, digging through more emails. One mentioned a delivery to an address in Manhattan, a high-end hotel. It was a long shot, but I went there, the duffel bag hidden under my jacket. The hotel was all glass and marble, the kind of place Caleb and I could never afford. I lingered in the lobby, watching for anyone who looked like they belonged in Caleb's secret world. That's when I saw him, not Victor, but the man from the photo in the storage unit. He was older, maybe 40, with a tailored suit and a predator's smile. He was talking to a woman, their conversation low and urgent. I followed them to the bar, keeping my distance, straining to hear. Caleb messed up, the man said. He thought he could walk away. The woman shook her head. Victor doesn't forgive. You know that. What do you do when you're close enough to hear the truth, but too far to act? I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I stayed quiet, my heart hammering. The man left, but the woman stayed, sipping her drink. I took a chance and approached her. Do you know Caleb? I asked, my voice barely steady. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't deny it. You're Ethan, she said, like it was obvious. Caleb's boy. How does everyone know my name? I snapped, frustration boiling over. She leaned closer, her voice low. Because Caleb wouldn't shut up about you. He wanted out for you, but he crossed the wrong people. She told me her name was Lena, and she'd worked with Caleb on Victor's jobs. Caleb had been moving money, lots of it, for Victor's operation, but he'd started skimming, saving up to get out. He was going to take you away, she said. Start over somewhere new. But Victor found out. The blood in the alley. The note. It was starting to make sense, but it hurt worse than I expected. Caleb had been planning a future for us, but he'd built it on lies. Where is he now? I asked, my voice breaking. Lena looked away. I don't know. After that night, he was gone. Victor doesn't leave loose ends. What does it mean to keep searching when everyone tells you the person you love might be dead? I couldn't accept it. I begged Lena for something, anything, to keep going. She hesitated, then slipped me a piece of paper with an address. Victor's safe house, she said. If Caleb's alive, that's where you'll find answers. But be careful. The safe house was in Jersey, a nondescript building in a quiet neighborhood. I went at night, armed with nothing but desperation and the burner phone. The place was dark, but I saw movement inside, shadows, voices. I crept closer, my breath shallow, and peeked through a window. There he was. Caleb. Alive, but barely. He was tied to a chair, his face bruised, his eyes hollow. Victor stood over him, a gun in his hand. What do you do when you finally find the person you've been searching for, only to realize you might lose them for good? Seeing Caleb like that, bruised, broken, but alive, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. How do you stand by when the person you love is suffering? I wanted to burst through the door, but Victor's gun stopped me cold. I crouched outside the safe house, my mind racing. I had the burner phone, the cash, and Lena's warning ringing in my ears. What could I do against someone like Victor? I wasn't a hero. I was just an artist who loved too hard. But love makes you reckless, doesn't it? I texted Lena from the burner phone, begging for help. She didn't respond right away, and every second felt like an eternity. Inside, I could hear muffled voices, Victor's, sharp and commanding, and Caleb's, weak but defiant. You'll never get away with this, Caleb said, his voice hoarse. Victor laughed. You thought you could steal from me and walk away. For him. Him. Me. This was my fault. Somehow. Caleb had wanted out for us. And now he was paying the price. Guilt clawed at me, but I pushed it down. I had to focus. Lena finally texted back, wait for my signal. Don't do anything stupid. What does it mean to trust a stranger with the life of the person you love? I had no choice. I waited, every muscle tense, until I heard a commotion in Zydia crash. Shouting. Lena's signal. I didn't think. I just acted, slipping through a side door into chaos. Lena was there, grappling with one of Victor's men. Caleb was still tied up, his eyes locking onto mine, wide with shock and something else hope. Maybe. Victor was distracted, yelling orders, his gun still in hand. Ethan, get out. Caleb shouted, but I couldn't leave him. Not again. I grabbed a metal pipe from the floor and swung at Victor's legs, catching him off guard. He stumbled, the gun clattering away. Lena took down the other guy, and for a moment, it was just us, me, Caleb, and Lena, against Victor. But Victor was fast. He lunged for the gun, and I threw myself at him, tackling him to the ground. We fought, a messy blur of fists and desperation. I wasn't strong, but I was angry at him, at Caleb, at myself. Lena got Caleb free, and he staggered to his feet, grabbing the gun before Victor could. Stop, Caleb said, his voice shaking but firm. The barrel pointed at Victor. What do you do when the person you love holds a gun, ready to cross a line? I stepped between them, my hands raised. Caleb, don't, I said. This isn't you. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd fallen for, the one who'd made me believe in love. I'm sorry, Ethan, he whispered. I never wanted you to see this. Victor laughed, blood on his teeth. You're weak, Caleb. Always were. Lena grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door. We need to go? Now. We ran, Caleb limping but alive, the sound of sirens growing closer. Lena had called the cops, tipping them off about Victor's operation. It was a risky move, but it bought us time to escape. We ended up in a motel, the three of us battered and shaken. Caleb told me everything, how he'd gotten in deep with Victor years ago, before we met. How he'd tried to get out, to build a life with me, but Victor wouldn't let him go. The blood in the alley was his, from a fight he'd barely escaped. The note was his goodbye, in case he didn't make it. What do you say to someone who risked everything for you, even if it meant lying? I didn't have words. Not yet. I just held him, feeling his heartbeat, knowing we weren't safe, but we were together. The motel room smelled of stale coffee and regret. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling as he stared at the floor. How do you rebuild trust when the truth has torn it apart? I thought I could protect you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought if I kept you out of it, you'd be safe. Safe. I snapped, the anger I'd held back spilling over. You disappeared, Caleb. You left me with blood and a note. Do you know what that did to me? His eyes met mine, raw and pleading. I didn't have a choice. Victor would have come for you. What does it mean to love someone who's hurt you, even if they didn't mean to? I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't. Not when he was sitting there, broken and alive. After everything. Lena interrupted, her voice sharp. We're not out of this yet. Victor's got people everywhere. We need to move. She was right. The sirens had bought us time. But Victor wasn't the type to go down quietly. We needed a plan. But first, I needed answers. I turned to Caleb. What did you steal from him? He hesitated, then pulled a USB drive from his pocket. Records, he said. Everything about Victor's operation names, deals, accounts. I was going to use it to buy my freedom. What do you do with a truth that could destroy everything? The USB was a weapon, but it was also a target. If Victor's people found us, we were dead. Lena took charge, mapping out a plan to get the drive to someone who could use it, a journalist she knew, someone who'd been digging into Victor's world for years. We left the motel at dawn, heading for a safe drop point in Brooklyn. The city felt different now, every corner hiding a threat. Caleb stayed close, his hand brushing mine, a silent apology. I wanted to pull away, but I didn't. The drop point was a bookstore, the same one where Caleb and I used to spend lazy Sundays. The journalist, a woman named Sarah, was waiting in the back, her eyes scanning us nervously. This better be worth it, she said, taking the USB. It's everything, Caleb said. But you need to move fast. Sarah nodded, slipping the drive into her bag. I'll get it out there. Stay low. What does it feel like to hand over your last hope? For Caleb, it was relief. For me, it was fear. We'd exposed Victor, but we'd also painted a target on our backs. We split up from Lena, who had her own plans to disappear. Take care of him, she told me, her eyes softening for the first time. He's worth it. Back at my apartment, Caleb and I finally really talked. He told me about the years before we met, the mistakes he'd made, the debts he'd racked up. I wanted to be better for you, he said, but I didn't know how. I didn't have answers, but I had him. And for now, that was enough. Sarah's article hit the news a week later, a bombshell that exposed Victor's empire. Arrests followed, names splashed across headlines. But Victor himself slipped away, a ghost in the system. How do you feel safe when the monster is still out there? Caleb and I stayed low, moving from one cheap motel to another, always looking over our shoulders. The USB had done its job, but it hadn't erased the fear. Every creak of a floorboard, every stranger's glance, felt like a threat. What does it mean to rebuild a life when the past is still chasing you? For us, it was small steps. We talked about the lies, the love, the future. Caleb wanted to start over, somewhere new, but I wasn't ready to run. Not yet. One night, in a motel outside Philly, I found him sketching, the way he used to in our old apartment. I never stopped loving you, he said, his voice soft. Even when I was running. I took the sketch, my throat tight. Then don't run again, I said. Stay? Fight for us. He nodded, and for the first time in months, I believed him. Months later, we settled in a small town upstate, far from the city's chaos. I started painting again, pouring everything, the pain, the love, the hope onto the canvas. Caleb got a job at a local bar, and slowly, we built something new. Not perfect, but ours. Victor was never caught, but his empire crumbled. The fear lingered, but it didn't define us. We did. What does it mean to love through the mess? It means choosing each other, every day, despite the scars. Caleb and I weren't just a love story. We were a story of survival, of finding light in the darkest corners. And in the end, that was enough.